All right, this is the Story Series podcast where we tell the stories behind the people. Jeffrey Fleishman, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. First time in Santa Clarita, so.
Yeah, welcome to the studio. Welcome to Santa Clarita. It's a real privilege to sit down with you, and I really appreciate you being here. For people who don't know, if I could just read a brief introduction. You are a journalist, a novelist, a former senior writer at the LA Times, where you also served as a foreign and national editor, having spent years as a foreign correspondent out of Cairo, Berlin, and Rome.
Right.
Also an author of 5 books, including the book where I came to know your work, My Detective, the first in a trilogy following Detective Sam Carver on the trail of a serial killer in modern-day Los Angeles. So once again, welcome.
Thank you.
Just as a way to get to know you a little bit better, I love to do origin stories. So if you could, where were you born? Where did you grow up?
My father was in the Navy, and he was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan, and my mother joined him later. And I was the first of 6 children born in Yokosuka, Japan. We left there at 2, when I was 2, and we sailed across the Pacific to San Francisco and drove across country, and ended up living up and down the East Coast wherever wherever his ship was at the base, mainly between Newport, Rhode Island, and Chesapeake, Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia area. So that's my origin. That's my origin story related to, related to my parents, and sort of I had 5 siblings, and we all sort of grew up in a traditional sort of house, Navy house, where we knew a lot of people coming in and out of our lives, given the transitory nature of military service and things.
Growing up, would you describe yourself as an especially creative child? Did you have those inclinations that early on?
I think I always had an imagination, and a lot of my early, the way I thought about the world and my own imagination and my place in it was 2 things, I think. I grew up in Catholicism, and it's very ritualistic, and the splendor of the Mass and the gigantic sort of spectacle the Mass can be sometimes on holidays. So that was one part. And then the other part, I think, was I didn't get into literature or books until later, but I was really shaped by movies. I would watch movies on TV. Back then we only had 3 channels and it was in black and white. But you'd see the old Humphrey Bogart movies, you'd see the old classics coming on, and I fell into the imaginary world of Hollywood and moving pictures at a very early age, and it's sustained. That's been sustained throughout my life. So I think those 2 things, until I got into really serious looking at books and literature and wanting to become a writer, but film really drew me in. And I think also, as far as my place in the world, a lot of my writing, both journalistically and in books, it deals with the world. And I think when my dad was in the Navy, he spent 2 tours in Vietnam. And I just always remember, a very young child, maybe 7 or 8, watching the Huntley Brinkley News, and they would do the body count. And you wonder if your father's that number in the body count. And so when I was looking at that, and I think this must be in my subconscious, because when I was exploring that as a child, I wanted to know what was going on in the world, because I had a stake in what was going on in the world. My father was someplace far away from our home, and I wanted to know. So I think very early on, that probably sowed the seeds for my wanting to become a foreign correspondent.
Whoa. And about how old were you when you were looking at that body count on screen?
I think like 7 or 8 years old. And I remember I was the oldest, and so I remember sitting with my mom every night around 6 o'clock or whenever it came on, and you'd see, the flashes of fighting and American soldiers in the jungle, and then they'd put the body count up, and it was so for a kid, that's pretty sobering. And it took the world of, again, I mentioned about how I was into film and that kind of imaginary thing. But then you see, which became so prevalent in the 60s, realism, because that was the first TV war. So now you're blurring boundaries. Now you're into the fictional territory of a movie, and all of a sudden you're into the reality of Vietnam. So
yeah, and I mean, the war inspired a whole genre.
Right, exactly. And literature as well, yeah.
And just going back to that body count number on screen, how long would it be until you would hear from your dad?
Well, back then, right? No internet, no phone calls, no anything. So you'd wait for a letter, and I can remember my mom used to go into depression, because a letter she would hope would come on Friday, didn't come on Monday, and then you get a letter, and then her letters went out, and then you'd have this sporadic chain of letters coming in, and every time a letter came in, you knew everything was good, and so the mood of the household went up, and then so you'd have these peaks and valleys. And my mother was amazing because she held it all together. She had 4 kids and a 5th one then, and she's holding it like a lot of military wives did at the time, wondering about how am I going to deal with all these crazy kids, and where's my husband? So yeah.
And your dad came home?
He came home. He came home after the first tour, and then I think it was like 8 months later, he was called back again. And so they were each about a year tours each time.
Wow. I can't imagine them doing something like that now.
Well, yeah, the lack of communication now. I mean,
the lack of communication, and there's obviously a lot of statistics in how news is reported, but just that body count number. I mean, how kind of graphic that is.
Right. And you didn't get much. You also had to remember then it wasn't 24/7. A lot of that news was hours and hours old. We weren't in the immediate consumption of information where something would trickle out and then you could see it transpire like on an arc over an hour. But then you got the body count on Tuesday night. You had to wait Wednesday night to get another update.
For a 7-8-year-old, you're facing a pretty harsh reality, but you're also finding some refuge in movies at the same time.
Yeah, an imaginary world of TV and things. I think that, and you had your friends, and a lot of them were military. I mean, one of our closest friends, Wally Bishop, he was chief of the boat in the Scorpion, which went down in, I think it was 1968 and never came up. I might be wrong on that date, but it was in the 60s. And, you drive to the pier wondering, is the boat coming in? And the submarine people knew, and the Scorpion was a submarine, a nuclear submarine, and they knew that if that boat's not on time, there's something wrong. And so I think 99 people died, and that at the bottom of the sea. So you got used to the trials and tribulations and the joys and tragedies of military life when you live on a base.
And especially in that military family, there's probably not a lot of sheltering, right? Like you're watching the news with your mom. Whereas now that's probably something we try to keep our kids away from. But back then, that was just, you were faced with it.
Yeah. Back then you just, there wasn't that sort of, you didn't have counselors coming to high school and grade schools asking how you were doing. There's good and bad to that. You had to sort of check your feelings early. Yeah. And my mom was very demonstrative, so we never had to keep anything suppressed. So,
a good friend of mine, his name is Brian Dellett, and he's a Vietnam veteran, and he got drafted, and he had talked to me about, he studied a lot of warriors in other cultures and war, and he said that there were some cultures where a warrior would have to master an art form before going to battle, just so when they came home, they would have an outlet for it, like painting or calligraphy.
Right.
And so I'm just trying to connect the 7-8-year-old you watching this and then getting into a life of writing. As you got a little bit older, is that when writing started to take hold of you?
I think I was mainly into in middle school and early high school, and junior high and high school, I was really into sports. I played football and I wrestled, and that was my consumption then. I didn't really focus on academics. I didn't focus on school. I focused on it, but I wasn't your scholar athlete. I was more your athlete. And then I think I had an epiphany around the 11th or 12th grade. I took a couple of elective courses in high school. Back then you could take elective courses, and I took one on Shakespeare, and I took another one called Moats, Maidens, and Merlin, which got you into the fantasy stuff.
That's kind of cool.
And that was cool because and the teachers were very perceptive, and they loved the literature they were teaching, and it became very infectious to me. And then in my senior year, I had a very formidable teacher in social studies who would sit us down, and he didn't have any books. I mean, he had books, but he didn't use them. And he'd throw out newspapers and magazines of the news of the day. And he'd say, let's discuss this. What do you think about what's going on? And, you're 16 and 17, you're trying to figure out the world, and here's this guy inviting you into the world and inviting you into other countries and other thoughts and ideas and ethics and moralities. And so those two things kind of opened the door for me. And I think it was in my late years in high school when I began to really know I wanted to be a writer. And I also, by my first year in college, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I knew I wanted to see the world. And that leaned me toward journalism, because you can do both and somebody else will pay for it. So that,
Yes.
I think by the time I was like the end of my sophomore year in college, I realized that was a trajectory I was on.
Where did you go to school?
I went to college at Lock Haven, which is a school in the center of Pennsylvania. And I got my first job at the Lock Haven Express 6 months after I graduated, which was a newspaper circulation of 9,000. And sometimes if the roads flooded and the guy from Renova couldn't get down to pick up the papers, when I went to cover something in Renova, I'd load up my little Volkswagen VW with the papers and drive them up and drop them off. So it was a wonderful experience for a young journalist, because you had to do everything. You had to take your own pictures. You had to develop your own pictures in a dark room, because there was no digital photography. Every third week was my week writing editorials as well as covering the news. You had to write features, then you had to do the history of Lock Haven, which is going through microfiche and coming up with what happened 60, 70, 80, 90 years. So you learned the storytelling in all different dimensions. And I think then I realized, when you work for a small town paper, you realize that every word you write is scrutinized, because everybody knows everybody. And you really had to become accurate. I mean, the first couple of times I made would make a mistake, I heard the publisher, who was also, there are only 5 reporters, a publisher and an editor. Fleishman, get in here! What? This bank guy didn't do this. Okay. So you really realize, wow, words matter, and words have meaning, and they can bring joy as well as pain. And if you screw up, it's on you. And so that taught me I learned a lot of lessons that first 2 years when I worked at the Lock Haven Express.
And did you find that you really took to it, that was an exciting...
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved it. And I got into a lot of, back then, Lock Haven Express wasn't sending you to Paris, right? So, I mean, I got into a lot of investigative work, investigating chemical plants and environmental poisonings and things like that. And that this is very post-Watergate era. So journalism back then wasn't seen like it is today. It was really romanticized, and it was really seen as effectual, because we look what happened with Woodward and Bernstein. That brought down a president. You wanted to be part of that conversation, and you wanted to think. I think more so then than now, you felt that. I think every journalist gets into it because the money. It's not a huge paying profession. But you felt like you were contributing to the social benefit and the political benefit of a country. Not that you were taking sides, but you were, this sounds naive now, but what you were writing and investigating would illuminate some part of society that the politicians, the judges, the police would make better. When you're in a career a long time, you realize that happens very rarely, but you never stop trying to do it. You never stop trying to make sure that information matters. And in a Jeffersonian democracy, it's our currency. At least it used to be. We're in a very different world, very scary world right now. But yeah, that's sort of those early. What I learned at the Lock Haven Express was I've kept since then. So it was very formative. Yeah.
And why investigative reporting at that time?
At that time, I loved getting deep into an issue and the facts. So I really jumped into that. And then I went to my next paper, the Allentown Morning Call, which was close to Philadelphia, outside. And I was there a couple years when I became, the chief investigative projects editor and writer, or projects writer. And we did, long 3 or 4 or 5-part series. And I loved that part of it. But I always had this yearning to. I want to start traveling. And so you can combine it, and I did combine it in some respects. But and after the Morning Call, I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I did projects there, and then I went on to the national desk. And I think one of the best parts of my career was the Inquirer, I was a national editor, but I was based in Pittsburgh, which is only 5 hours from, but I was based there because the U.S. Air Hub can fly to all of Appalachia cities. So I covered the Appalachian coal fields of Kentucky, West Virginia, and the Carolinas, and it was amazing because I went into another world. That world is so misrepresented now. Now we see it as J.D. Vance and MAGA land, but you saw that taught me a really poignant lesson about America, that there are some societies that are so wedded to the land and their culture that even when economic destruction happens, like what happened in the coal industry, they can't leave because their grandparents and great-grandparents are buried in the cemetery right down the street. And because I don't think we really understand why a lot of Trump supporters became Trump supporters, and that neglect that they felt, whether you want to buy into that scenario or not, there was still a lot of pain there, and that residue pain that I began seeing in the early 90s. I saw the rise of fentanyl is now. I saw the rise of prescription drug abuse and how people would line up outside of, in Lecter County, Kentucky, line outside of the drugstore or the to get their prescription filled. Like lines of people when check day came in to get it. And they were young people, old people, minors who said they had disabilities. And you saw this gradual deterioration of communities when the drugs came in and the economic decline came in, and they said, okay, well, we're going to reinvent you. So they, said, okay, we'll reinvent you for the high-tech world, but they couldn't get broadband in, so because of the mountains. So I love telling those stories from Appalachia because I learned a lot about a culture. I learned a lot about humility. I learned a lot about when you show up at a place, check your stereotypes. Some stereotypes are true, but if you want to go deeper and really understand the layers of humanity, you have to go in with an open mind.
And that was just, that's not Paris or anywhere overseas. It's like right in our own backyard.
But to me, it was foreign.
Absolutely.
It was exotic. It was, yeah. I remember some of the, and there was so much wisdom there. One woman I met was Becky Simpson. I still remember her name. And she would go out every morning in Harlan County, Kentucky. Back then was one of the poorest places in the country, and just go to the dollar store and pick up little things that we would take. I went with her on her drives, and she would take to people who were shut in, who had been left. And we went into this one home of this woman. It was like something out of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. It was a shack in the woods. And I don't want to sound stereotypical, but that's really what it was, a shack in the wood by a stream. And I thought, nobody lives here. And we went in and she knocked and she pushes the door open. And there's this woman with a shawl around her, long gray hair falling asar from the back. And she's sitting next to an open stove. And she's shivering because there's no heat. And her family had left and she was there. Her family had left to go north and south for other jobs, and she was there. She didn't want to go. But I noticed when we turned around, you see the glow of the light coming out of the stove, and the embers were sparking, popping like wood does and coal does. And they had burned her shins on both sides because they'd become numb, but she didn't want to leave the fire because she was so cold. So Becky had bought her a pair of lined boots. So Becky gets on her knees. It's like something out of something biblical. Gets on her knees and slides off this woman's wet socks and slides on her boots. And the woman, as Becky's on her knees, pats Becky on the head and says, "Becky, I do believe we preach our funerals every day." Meaning, that's your eulogy, Becky, what you're doing for me. And it was just so moving in this little dimly lit place.
Wow.
So you get into, that's why I love being a journalist so much. You get into the lives of others, and you have the honor of sort of bearing witness to people at their best, their worst, their in-betweens.
And did you feel like some of your work back then did illuminate certain parts of the country for people here?
I hope it did. I mean, you never, I mean, certainly by the response some of the stories got, yes, you felt like sometimes you hit a note that resonated with people. Other times you didn't know. You just put it out there.
But it certainly did for you.
For me, I couldn't be more enriched. Yeah. For me, it was, every day was enriching.
And at what point did you try to move towards international coverage?
When I was, I knew when I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer, I wanted to get overseas, and when I knew I got on the national desk, that was the next step was probably going to be a foreign posting. So I roamed around the country on the national desk, and then 3 years later, I jumped to the foreign desk. And it was exactly what I wanted to do.
And did you have any idea where you were going to go at that point?
The first inkling that I was going to be on the foreign desk is when I'd done my national tour, and the Inquirer back then was a paper that because I knew a lot of people wanted to either go overseas or be national correspondents, those are top jobs back then. So the Inquirer had a role of saying that, okay, if you're a national or foreign correspondent and you've done it 3.5 years, you've got to rotate back to the mothership because we got other people to do it, and we don't want you to wander too far away and not get used to us. So I'd come back from my national assignment, and I was on the Metro desk waiting to see where I was going to go next. And one Saturday afternoon, the foreign editor called my house, and I wasn't on there. And he says, "Hey, Jeff, you want to go to Nepal and hike over the Himalayas with a bunch of Tibetans?" Like just like that. I said, "Why not?" So we had done. It was a story that was. There were 13 Tibetan monks and nuns who had been tortured in prison in Tibet, and they were released. And the Dalai Lama wanted them in Nepal, and then into Dharamsala, which was the Tibetan government in exile in northern India. And so we were going to follow these people trekking across the Himalayas to their journey to Dharamsala, Nepal, and then Dharamsala. And it was just amazing because we flew to Lhasa. I hadn't been any foreign correspondence at all. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in Lhasa, Tibet, waiting to meet this little guy with a mustache who's our guide. And we had to be completely undercover because, American journalists weren't supposed to be there. So we got hiking visas that we were hiking in the Himalaya region. And then we met this group of monks and nuns who had been tortured in prison, and some still bore the marks of their torture. And we met them I'll never forget, we met them at dusk in a ravine. We all got dropped off when we met. And then we took off across the mountains. And it was just incredible because these people were really escaping for their lives. And it was amazing.
And what was the length of that hike?
That was, it was like it was like 4 or 5 or 6 days, I can't remember. And then our photographer got altitude sickness and couldn't go on. So we had to leave the trek about 5 or 6 days in and bring her down altitude because she couldn't function. And then once she got her bearings, we had to hustle around in all kinds of different ways. We made an agreement with the guide that, okay, we'll meet you in this Nepal tea shop at this mountain range at X days. And he goes, yeah, but if you're not there, I'm not leaving because we got to keep going. And luckily, by the grace of whatever, we got her down to it. We went around the mountain and then climbed back up on the other side and met them in Nepal and then sort of debriefed them on the 4 or 5 days that we weren't with them. And it was an amazing story.
Was there any part of you that felt any doubt or in over your head or like just, what am I doing here?
Yeah, but I felt that every day, but it was so intoxicating. I mean, because you're there and you're there where it was, these people were, it wasn't like a bunch of people who bought North Face and Gore-Tex and went to go see how high they could climb, Westerners. These were people who were in $2 tennis shoes and barely anything on their bodies, who had been tortured and bruised, and 2 of the nuns had been raped with cattle prods, and here they were, and this was it. This was life or death for them, and so that makes you as I said earlier about the honor of telling someone's stories, it's your responsibility to show up for that in every possible way that you can, and be true and virtuous to what that story is and what it means to people and to them and to your readers.
And what was the reception to that story when it finally came out?
That was big. I mean, that was a lot of people, because a lot of people were paying to Tibet at the time. The Dalai Lama was in the news a lot. China was making entreaties to go in. They had just clamped down on a lot of the dissidents there. It was sort of one of the final gasps before China really took control of Tibet.
Approximately what year was that?
It was in 95, 96, 95. I want to say.
Yeah, and is that part of the reason you had to be undercover as an American journalist?
Yeah,
I was thinking because of those tensions with China, or also just within Tibet itself.
Yeah. Well, with China, because if we were traveling with, eventually, if the Chinese, we hiked at night so we could avoid the Chinese soldiers during the day, because if they caught us, if they caught the Tibetans or us, everyone would be in trouble. But we didn't want to endanger the Tibetans more than they were. So, but we told them eventually, if the Chinese did catch us, we'd have to admit that we were journalists. But we were also under the guise of trekking, which technically we were. So we tried to, but we didn't want to if we got arrested by the Chinese, we didn't want the Tibetans to suffer because of that, but they would have suffered anyway it's called, they have a phrase for it called dying in the white. Like if you didn't get through at a certain time of year, if you waited too late in the fall or the winter, the blizzards came in. So there would be dead Chinese, Tibetans hiking who didn't make it in time. And our guide, the guide who was with us, he was experienced at doing this. He must have brought three or 400 people over the years out of Tibet into Lhasa, the ones the Dalai Lama wanted there. And he had these crisscross marks. I remember one, he was about this big, he smoked cigarettes all the time, had this long mustache, and his name was Dorji. But and he took his shirt off one day and was washed by a stream, and he had these crisscross white scars on him from frostbite, because he had done this so many times and exposed to the elements. And but he said, I'm a poor, uneducated man. There's nothing I can do for my country except this. And so every time he went, he risked his life to do it, to get what he called the educated and the monks and the religious out.
It's that sense of purpose.
Yeah.
It's that sense of purpose that drives it, just like as a journalist.
Yeah, that was his purpose, man. Yeah, I remember one time, though, he had a great, wonderful, satirical, ironic sense of humor. And one night we were hiking. And when you're up that high, the stars you feel like you just reach out and grab them. And it's so clear. I've never seen a sky so clear. And we stopped for a break along a stream, and I hear this boom. And so Dorji fell on his back on his backpack. And because he was so short, he looked like a turtle. And he lit his cigarette and was smoking. And I saw the ember. And he breathed out the smoke. And he said, I got to find another line of business. He was such a character. And then he packed us up and we kept on going. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I had the opportunity to study in China from 2013 to 2015. And they tell you it's like the 3 T's that you don't mention: Tibet, Taiwan, Tiananmen.
Yeah. How did you find it then? That's much more recent than when I was there.
I loved it. I was going to university at Cal State Northridge here after community college, and I wanted to be a screenwriter, and I didn't know how you got a job as a screenwriter, after college. And I thought, if I take the humanities masters, I'll be a broader person. And then if I'm a broader person, I'll be a better writer. That was my thinking. And then
great idea.
Yeah, I thought, and then just like you got that random phone call, I got a random email on a Saturday from a professor that said China scholarship opportunity. He sent it to the whole class. And that was one of those moments where I knew I was going, even though I never applied to anything in my life, really. And I said, I'm going to China. This is like the humanities, but in real life. So I said no to the humanities, and I applied to China, ended up getting the scholarship. And so I shipped out. I graduated in June, was there in August. Part of why I asked you if you got your wish to go abroad, any part of you just feel fear or doubt? Because I remember that's what I wanted. I didn't know I wanted it, but I wanted it. And while I was there, of course, had a lot of fear in the beginning. I was scared, and I was scared to admit it. But it was just the best. I loved it, and I needed it.
Changes your life. I mean, it's not an overstatement, but to see another culture like that, especially one with China and the time we're in now, so prevalent to what's going on in the world and shaping the world. It's
For a kid in the suburbs, like you need that.
Yeah,
you know?
that exoticism. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
You wanted to stay abroad.
right.
And so where did that take you?
So I came back, and then opening for our Rome bureau happened. So in '97 we moved to Rome.
You went from also Rome, Berlin, and Cairo.
Yeah, for the Philadelphia Inquirer, I was in Rome. 2002, I jumped from Rome to Berlin for the Los Angeles Times.
Is that when you first arrived at the LA Times?
Yeah, I never was in LA. I never lived in LA. I never was out here, and I just said, I flew out here to interview for the job, and then went to Berlin in 2002.
But are there stories from your time there that still stay with you?
In much of my time in Rome was spent covering the war in Kosovo and what was happening in the Balkans. So that was, in my first novel, Promised Virgins, a novel of jihad, is actually based on that experience. They say a lot of writers, when you write your first book, some of it's autobiographical or autofiction. Well, that's true.
You say that's a foreign correspondent.
Foreign correspondent who was covering the war in Kosovo as this mysterious Osama bin Laden-like character lands in the mountains of the Balkans, and that actually was happening. There were jihadists who were coming into the Kosovo conflict and even into the Bosnian War, who thought they could radicalize European Muslims who were the Muslim community in the Balkans, and so they did come with money and weapons, and so it's partly based on this guy that I came in contact with there, but it's also a story of like foreshadowing what was going to come on September 11th.
In the years leading up to it, did you always know at some point you were going to write a novel?
Yeah, I always knew before I got over, that was always, my first thing was to get overseas and tell as many stories of the world as I could. And then as I collected those, somehow I knew that was going to shape eventually becoming a novelist, which I wanted to become, but I needed to find, one of my very earliest influences in literature was Ernest Hemingway.
Oh, yeah.
And so okay, wow, he covered wars, he did this and this, he traveled the world, and he wrote novels. And I think for someone of my generation, that was a very formative character, a larger-than-life character. So I sort of wanted to fashion a little bit of that. And a lot of people were doing it by then, too. Like, we wanted to be a novelist, and so to use your foreign experience to do that.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I had a hunch that was the case. And it just in my own experience going to China was the same way. It was like, I don't know how this is going to, one-to-one make me a better storyteller, but I think if I just live and I get outside of my comfort zone and I just experience, it's going to help.
Right.
And
if it's there, if it's inside you, certain things are going to evoke and then provoke it to happen.
Yeah. And when you began writing your first novel, did you feel at that point that there was no sense in putting it off any longer? Did you feel like, why then? Why at that moment?
I had to write it.
You felt you had to.
Felt like, yeah,
that's the way to do it. Right?
I felt confident in my foreign reporting. I felt confident in my career. I felt confident that I had the time. 'Cause foreign correspondence, you're dealing with time differences and everything else, so it's like almost 24/7. But I felt confident that I could work it in, and I just felt I knew at that point I had to write. Just like I knew I had to be a foreign correspondent, I knew I have to start writing novels.
And what was that process like for you in terms of, what did being a journalist teach you about novel writing?
Two things. One is that, and this is very evident in my first book, a lot of who I was, a lot of my experiences, a lot of those things were fictionalized because it helped me cross the bridge from reality to this other imaginary world that if you wanted to be a novelist, you had to also cross the bridge and then drop the bridge because you couldn't keep carrying all the realist stuff in, or otherwise it'd be a memoir or a nonfiction book. And you had that was the tough part about the good part about being a journalist was you have all these experiences, you know how to write under pressure, you know how to write under deadline, you know how to shape a story. But wait a minute, you're in foreign territory now. No pun intended. Now you're in the realm of the imagination. So when does the writer, the novelist in you, say to the foreign correspondent and the journalist, thank you, but I'm going to go this way now? That was the thing.
Right, because at least in journalism, there are boundaries, which is the truth.
Right.
And in novel writing your own story,
the truth is whatever you want to make it. Whatever the world, you create the world, you have to make that truth in the world, in your world you create.
Yeah, I was wondering, having been a journalist for so long at that point, and then writing your first novel, whether it was liberating to get to make a story up, and what was unexpectedly challenging about it at the same time.
Yeah, my wife and I, Claire Fleishman, she writes nonfiction books. She wrote a book called Globesity. She wrote a book on fertility. She's on the very nonfiction science side of things. So we often have conversations about, okay, here's a nonfiction thing, and sometimes, my world's harder than your world, but yeah. It's all telling stories, but it's how you tell the stories. Because I have great respect for her because she dives into all these files and arcane stuff that I know nothing about to put it into layman's terms and put a book out. And I'm dealing with a different kind of truth. Once I create the world in fiction, there's still truths in it. There's still ethics in it. You can't all of a sudden tell the reader, okay, welcome to my world, now I'm going to do whatever I want. Because you can't do that. Because once a reader knows a character, a shape or form of dialogue, you've set a reality in that fictional world that you can't contradict. Because the reader will say, I don't buy this, even if it's fiction.
Outlining a novel or writing a first draft is just finding those boundaries, finding what your truth is, right?
Right.
And when that came out, what was that reception like for you?
It just felt really good to see your book out there between covers.
Something you can hold.
Something
right?
I can hold. And back then, it came out in 2009, so ebooks weren't really that big. It was still like the old feel of publishing. And, I went to meet my publisher. We went out to dinner. I had a reading at Barnes & Noble in Manhattan. It was just very heady, right? It was great.
Yeah.
And so that was the exciting part of it. But then I just wanted to get back and write another one.
Which you did.
Yeah.
Which was Shadow Man.
Shadow Man.
Yeah. Which was also is about a journalist too.
Right.
So it's still a little close to you at that point.
Right, but the tethers begin to stretch and become broken because it's the story of Shadow Man is told by three different voices. And it's basically about a man, a former foreign correspondent, who's in his early 60s, who has early onset dementia and Alzheimer's, and he only has one memory. But the people in the book are determined to keep that memory alive because they're each part of it. But his sister, who he never knew, is part of that memory, and she only discovers later that this is her brother. But he doesn't know she's part of his world at all. So it's about memory and loss and what we see and who we are and how that shapes us. And then we go through life with all these things that make us so rich and wonderful and beautiful and sublime characters. And then in the end, when you get a disease like that, like a tree stripped of its bark, you have one thing, and even that's fading. And you're left in your room looking out a window.
Yeah, we had dealt with that with my mom's mom, my grandma, who we watched go through a similar condition and just start to lose her memory. And it's particularly, I saw what it did to my mom, where she's taking care of her mom, and her mom doesn't really know who she's being taken care of.
Right.
She doesn't know it's her daughter.
Oh, along those lines, I think the early seeds of, and must be very subconscious, but the early seeds of that book, Shadow Man, came when I was 14 and 15, and my dad's mother, my grandmother, died of early onset dementia, and then my dad had it, and so. This was before even that happened, but I think I glimpsed my grandmother one time when we were visiting in New York, and she was curled up almost in a fetal position, and I was passing her bedroom, and her caregiver was there, and I still, even right now as I'm talking about it, it's like a picture in my mind that's so real and vivid, and I think that must have stayed in my subconscious because I've noticed even in the Sam Carver book, Sam Carver's mother has Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And I must have this strange fascination with that becomes part of a narrative. Not in Shadow Man, it's the main narrative. It's the story. But.
Right. Just the idea of memory is, in a sense, all we have. Right. To a degree.
Well, look at humanity. Look at everything. If you strip it all away, we are our stories. And that sounds like a cliche, but it's not. History is formed on the telling of stories. Religion is formed on the telling of stories. Families are built on stories. If we don't have our stories anymore, then what are we diminished to? Who are we? What are we? We don't have, what do we bring in the world?
Jumping to your third novel, which is My Detective, which kickstarted the Sam Carver trilogy, what became a trilogy of books. You, at some point, you moved to Los Angeles, right?
Came back to Los Angeles in 2014. Arrived in Los Angeles.
I was going to say, because you were a foreign correspondent working for the Times, but you had never, to interview, but you hadn't lived here.
Right.
I remember reading that about you. And so I have to ask you, what were the stereotypes about Los Angeles that were true and what weren't?
My wife and I are real city people because we lived in the center of all those cities, and we wanted to live in LA, but we didn't. LA's not like any other city, as any hero would tell you. But so we moved downtown, right across in the old Metro building or the old subway building, right down catty corner to the Grand Central Market.
Yes.
So I often think about Los Angeles, and this came out so much in the Sam Carver series. Like, it was my adopted city because I hadn't lived here. It was foreign to me. It was like coming to a foreign country. It seemed to me to be very diffuse, colorful, but very diffuse, because I didn't sense a soul in it like you did in New York or other places. And that sometimes word is overused when it comes to city, but I didn't feel a central presence to it. I felt a very diffuse, broken up places, and that's sort of the glory and beauty of Los Angeles, all this patchwork of neighborhoods going through. And then, so the city itself, geographically, was very interesting to me. And then layer on that the elements. You have the palm trees at dusk. You have the sunset. You have all these things conspiring. There was this travel writer I think it was a British travel writer in the 1800s, and he described the city of Naples, Italy, as a paradise inhabited by devils. And I think at dusk at Los Angeles, it reminds me of a paradise inhabited by devils, because day is one thing, and then night becomes something else. And so it's a repository of everyone's dreams, ambitions, their nefarious sides, their affirmations, everything they want to be could bundled up in Los Angeles. And here at Los Angeles, you are at the edge of the continent. You're between the ocean, the mountain, and the deserts, all very inhospitable, as the recent wildfires have shown us, should we even be here. So humanity's hubris is all here too. And then you, boom, layer on Hollywood, your world, on top of that, and it creates, well, you can do whatever you want because it's fantasy land. It's great.
You had written a piece in the LA Times, it might have been last year, where you wrote about how downtown in Los Angeles had changed in the 10 years.
Right.
And it was the piece where
to live and die in LA, I think I called it.
Yeah, which is a great title.
Yeah.
And you talked about your neighbor, the hawk, that you would kind of see.
Yeah.
And then the sign there was a sign across from, like a neon sign that would kind of flicker on and off randomly.
Right. Hotel Clark.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you had said that was one of the mysteries that kind of kept you in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I find LA very mysterious that way. Like that's a perfect example. I live right across the street from the Hotel Clark, which is abandoned. The landlords decided to keep it abandoned for tax reasons or whatever. We have homeless sleeping. The wonderful contradiction of Los Angeles too is, especially when you live downtown, you're living on the borderline between the poorest, most disheveled people and the richest, wealthiest, all, and it's all happening here. It's a wonderful, fluid social experiment. I live across from Perch, the nightclub.
Yeah, of course.
And you would look out my window and you would see all these people popping up in their SUVs and Escalades and getting out and, ready for a night of partying. And there'd be a line in the Perch on a Friday or Saturday night stretching down the street in front of the Hotel Clark. But there would be homeless people sleeping there. But the line just went around the homeless people. And it was like, it's such a disconnect, but it's so LA, it's so Los Angeles.
I love downtown Los Angeles. I think, I'm probably guilty of romanticizing, just loving the city experience. And that's where you get it in Los Angeles. And so, but one thing that I had noticed is all these really nice restaurants in abandoned looking buildings. Right. With the homeless sleeping right out front.
Yeah.
It's just, it's that contrast. And I remember there was a couple of years ago, I'd run in the LA Marathon and, it goes through that area right next to Dodger Stadium. And we went through Little Tokyo and there's people in tents, right there. And then thousands of runners passing them by. Yeah. And it's like, it's a great
surreal, sad juxtaposition of society, a microcosm in LA, but also writ large in more recent years. And then I think any writer who comes here has to understand the legacy of what's already been written about it. You don't want to repeat that. You don't want to be, Raymond Chandler. You don't want to be Joan Didion and all these people. You want to put your experience, this thing that they did, but it's your own. It's unique. It's like any writer has to make it unique. You have to see it through your own eyes. And I think Los Angeles offers that kind of opportunity because it's so rich in that kind of thing, in that kind of exploration of spirit, of psychology almost, of all the people who come here, what makes them really work, what makes them tick, and then should we even be here? All right? I mean, can we, the wildfires raise a great example or the great question of what does the future of Los Angeles look like? Right? What can you build a city, a sustainable city, when you know climate change is only going to get worse, sea levels are only going to rise, wildfires are only going to be more of? What is it in man or humanity that can say, okay, but we can still live here? Can we? I mean, I find that experiment and what we're going to find out 10 or 20 years down the road is fascinating. And then it's the home of noir, right? It's so it all works.
Moving out here, was that when the seeds of what became My Detective started to kind of take shape?
Subconsciously, yes. My Detective came about when I wrote a third novel that's still in the proverbial desk drawer of the novelist. And I wrote it, and it was about an Iraqi war veteran who returned to a different country, and when he returned home. And I just spent a lot of time on it, and it was done, but there was something missing, and I couldn't put my finger on what was missing, and it was very frustrating. But I knew the book wasn't ready, but I didn't know how to get beyond it. So, and I was looking out my window one day, and the Clark Hotel is there, and the homeless are there, and I remember watching Humphrey Bogart on TV, and I'm in Hollywood land, and I'm thinking, I used to love these Sam Spade murder mystery stuff. And so look, why don't I give it, it's not my genre. I mean, the first two books, I hate genres anyway, like it can be anything, but my first two books were probably genre, would be literary fiction. And I said, I've never written crime fiction, but I love crime fiction movies. I never really read any crime fiction until I started doing this. And so my thing was, okay, I want to see where this goes. And I loved it. I got into the darkness of things right away. I was able to explore Los Angeles more. It's sort of nooks and crannies, both in a psychological perspective and a geographical, actually physical perspective. So, and I just wrote My Detective, not thinking it was going to be a series, not thinking anything. And I wanted to have, I think what's different from maybe my books, my Sam Carver series, and most sort of quote unquote procedural crime stuff is I like to get into the issues of the day. I like to get into exploring the narratives of my characters more. I like to get into the richness of what's happening around them. So My Detective because I was living downtown. And when we moved back in those 10 years, the first 5 or 6 of those, Los Angeles was really changing. It was pre-COVID. A lot of foreign money, Asian money was coming into downtown. Buildings were going up. Trust fund babies were renting lofts and other things. It was you felt, oh, wow, this is happening. And so I wanted to capture the changing architecture of Los Angeles. And so that's why I made Dylan Cross, who is the killer in the books, an architect.
Yes.
So I could explore that question of, if we're going to build, what are we going to build, and what does that say about us? What is the mirror that holds up to us?
The novel is captures just the mood of the city so well. And you mentioned writing about the events of the day. You know, Trump is mentioned frequently in the first novel because he had just won the election.
That's one thing I learned about readership. Trump was there, but man, MAGA people do not like you taking. I got a lot of hate mail on how dare you treat our president that way, and how it really gave me an insight into and I'm thinking, people, this is fiction. I mean, this is just made up stuff. But again, I do like my characters to inhabit the reality of the world. It's not just a procedural where X happens, Y happens, we're going to catch them at Z. But like My Detective deals with architecture. The second one, Last Dance, deals with Putin in the Cold War in Hollywood. And the third one, Good Night Forever, deals with homelessness and the rise of right-wing extremism. I wanted to set all those stories and those narratives in something larger.
What were your cinematic influences? Like Chinatown is a personal favorite, and that comes to mind, or The Long Goodbye, or Blade Runner. Any of those factor into your?
I think I try to write cinematically anyway. So I just think the city itself did it to me. I'm sure I was influenced what you said because of what I said earlier. Back when I was 8, 9, and 10, I got into movies and I got to Hollywood. So that's certainly the camera. I think a lot of my writing, I think this answers your question, but in a different way. A lot of my writing was taken from the movies I had seen and the directors who had shaped scenes, and that stayed with me. And I think when I started writing, I think part of the film lens was in the way I wrote, or at least I tried to be. I wanted to be visual. I wanted you to, and in journalism too, I think you have to bring the reader to a place and then put them in this place. But they have to see it, smell it, hear it, and touch it like you do. Otherwise it becomes a kind of squishy place that doesn't have the things they need to carry them through the story. So,
why do you think noir still holds people to this day? I know you're kind of against genre, but just being so deliberate about it. Is it plain old mystery aspect?
I think it's mystery too. I think there's always, like Sam Carver, he's a damaged figure. His father was a boxer who was beaten who was murdered. Who he plays the piano. He's kind of a melancholy guy. He's sort of a half romantic, a half realist. He's caught in between. He's trying to figure out L.A. too. There's all these things I think noir does that taps into each of us. And I don't want to say the darkness, but taps into the longing that we might have for things in life that we don't have voice to. But when we see it or we read it, we can tap into that sort of loneliness. I mean, I wanted to make Carver, who had a sense of humor and was snide, but I wanted to make a resonant loneliness to him that wasn't it wasn't the kind of loneliness where you say, oh God, I don't want to be around that guy. It was a knowing loneliness, and how you bring that to the world and how you relate to other people and sort of heal yourself in the process, or try to anyway.
Is that kind of loneliness also found in journalism? Just being a journalist, being a writer?
I think so. I mean, I think it's like you're in any kind of writing and any kind of thing. You go out and get the story, and then you come back with the story, and it's you
in a room,
just like we are here, just like what you do. Yeah. You in a room with a laptop or a sheet of paper, and say, okay. And even though you've got a notebook full of people, and you're going to play God with those people, it's still lonely, right? It's still, until that first person gets on the page, until that first line is written, it's you and the elements.
What was the learning curve in writing My Detective for you?
The learning curve was one that by then anything I had journalistically as far as auto fiction making was gone, because there's no Sam characters. His one love interest in My Detective is a journalist who leaves to go to the Washington Post, but that's a sort of sexual sort of urge sidekick kind of thing, and there's a mutual transaction there. And then but no, it's by then I wasn't thinking about journalism or journalist. My role as a journalist didn't factor into that at all. Then I was into what I had to learn about writing noir or crime fiction was the story's got to keep moving. The readership doesn't want to get slowed down too much, so I had to push myself to say, because I like to take detours and alleyways, but I realized I had to pull a lot of that back, because you got to keep it going. But I still think, for me, character is more important than plot. It's more important than speed, because I think if you really enchant the reader with a character that they like and they believe in, they want to know about that reader. It's not going in a cul-de-sac. They want to know, but you have to know when to drop that, bio in. You have to know that stream of content. You can't all of a sudden be going racing at 100 miles per hour and then say, and by the way, you can't be that way. It's got to be organic to the narrative.
Yeah, and that's kind of brings up the book's structure, which is like a dueling narrative or a dueling perspective between Sam Carver, who's the detective, and then Dylan Cross, who's the serial killer. And so they're both narrating each chapter. And did that kind of factor into it? Like, when did you decide on that way to tell that story?
I exactly. I don't block out a book. I don't make notes. I don't do anything. I just jump in. So I knew I was going to write a noir, a detective thing, and I wrote the first Sam chapter, and I'm thinking like, okay, well now I got. How am I going to try Dylan? Dylan's actually bigger than Sam, and I can't just like have Sam tell me about Dylan. I mean, she's too big. And I think the thoughts that I have about who Dylan Cross was going to be by the time I got to chapter 2, because chapter 1 opens with a murder, her killing somebody, and then so I knew. So that's when I sort of flipped the order a little bit. Dylan got moved to the front in her first person so I could set the stage. And then I realized it's got to be two people talking to one another. They each have to be first person, because their characters are so big and their interiors are so big and rich that I want it to be. So, and I thought, structurally, well, alternating chapters of first person might work. And then it became very natural. It just felt like I felt that had the book. There was one moment when I thought maybe I should do this in third person, but I didn't.
Well, I mean, just as a testament to you, the voices are so distinct.
Oh, thank you.
Once the chat, I mean, you know exactly who you're with, and Dylan's voice is just so strong, and that just a compliment to you. There's no question.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I wanted Dylan to be, Dylan's I wanted Dylan to come with a lot of baggage and a lot of nuance and a lot of hurt, pain, what happens to her, and why she's, lasted through 3 novels. As she was, a very grievous crime was done to her, and her thing is now bent on retribution. But she doesn't know where to put that. She doesn't know where that goes and how that is part of her, how this terrible tragedy that happened to her is part of her, how she deals with it, and the viciousness that comes out in a character she never thought she was, and how does she live with that? And she does, and sometimes she does, sometimes she doesn't. And she sees Carver, the guy who was actually tracking her down to arrest her, as in some ways a savior, because part of Dylan wants to be caught and part of her doesn't. And then she has to create another narrative of which Sam fits into as both a strange love interest, a savior, and some kind of mirror that will tell her, I'm not a bad person.
Right. And she has those lines throughout of, how she's not so bad, or how this being at odds with how she's viewed by even herself. And it seems like the perfect kind of character for a movie or a story set in the land of Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
It's like fantasy land. I just have to ask you, it's just such a small thing about her name, Dylan Cross, because it reminded me of Noah Cross in Chinatown. I don't know if there was any relation, or if you're a Dylan fan. I'm always wondering if people like Bob Dylan.
I'm a Dylan fan.
You are.
So you got
yes.
there, yeah.
Okay, because you had earlier in the novel, you had mentioned there was a Dylan song playing.
Right.
And I said, okay, Bob Dylan. I said, I got to ask.
Yeah, no, Dylan. I'm a big Dylan, and I think in all the books too. All my musical tastes are laid to bear.
That's true.
I just put my music because I just think music is so much a part of life. It's just sometimes you don't even know it, and it's there.
It's true, and it's like what you said about the way that you're writing Los Angeles, where you have to see it, smell it, feel it like that. I mean, music is. I mean, you have to hear it too.
Yeah, music is just. I think music can take us places where the written word just falls short. Even even the image, the moving image. When you hear a song, the first beat of a song, has meaning for you at some part in your life. Everything opens up in you, right? It's an immediate thing, almost like scent, a sensory thing. Yeah.
Is there a lot of overlap between the process of a journalist and the process of a detective?
It's a good question because yes, I do. I think you're investigating. People don't always want you around, right?
Right. They might lie to you.
You have to put it. You have to put a scenario in. You have to plug in why, the who, what, when, where, and why. So yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of similarities between. I think that's why in a lot of detective novels, there's a journalist lurking around somewhere.
There's always right.
Right. There's a voice of a journalist because a journalist in a detective novel can also play, in some ways, a second detective. They're trying to find the story too.
Absolutely. And I was wondering, as a journalist, what your relationship was like with law enforcement, and how did it feel writing about a detective who didn't always want to speak with the press? Being on the other side of it, poking your, your professional
right.
self.
And some of that comes out in the book, like,
right.
You just don't want to, or like a detective's boss, Ortiz, he doesn't like, what are they going to write about us now? What's the LA Times going to write about it? Why did they move to El Segundo? Who lives in that? Anytime he can dig in the journalist profession, he's going to do it.
And you probably dealt with that a lot.
Yeah. But it's, you learn, I learned early on in my career, like with law enforcement, the military, things that people that you have to deal with who, they don't want the information out because it could damage what they're doing. And what they're doing is paramount to them, just like with what I'm doing to tell the story is paramount to me. So the only way to cover cops and the military and any kind of government institution is to build trust and to talk to people on background and do this. And then eventually there's an understanding of, hey, let's talk about this. You can only use X, Y. You can't use A, B, and C. And eventually you'll be able to, but here it is. And then once you develop that trust, but that trust takes months, sometimes years to build, but it's broken like that as a journalist, if you blow it.
That reminds me, there was a line in the book. It was a face can trick you, but not a voice.
Right.
And that was something that I just like, that it's one of those lines that I feel like someone could take. It's a lifetime of wisdom to write a line like that. Can you tell me about where that came from?
Just because when you're sitting with somebody no matter what kind of situation, they always say that, the face but to me, the slight inflection or the drop of voice or the way a syllable rises, lifts, or kind of fades away really tells you somebody's mood, where they are, where the face can be smiling and telling you, but you can't hide the voice. You can't hide the sound. The sound is like, maybe that's a song. Maybe that's what you're hearing. You can't hide it. But the face, I think, the mask, right? We build masks for our face because the face can sometimes give us away, but the voice, the voice cannot give us away. The face can you can't hide that sound. of misery, of despair, or whatever. But I do think the face can be a mask. That's what I meant to say, and can say, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine.
Right.
Yeah. But the voice is. I had an experience where just the last story I did for the Los Angeles Times last month was a family that lost their home in the Altadena fire, and I spent time mostly with the mother and the wife, and she was her voice, because her face would try to put on, the strong face, and we're going to get through this. But while she's saying that, the voice is cracking or going soft, and you're feeling the true pain and agony of what it's going to be like to try to rebuild, the hope and all these things. And I just listened to the voice, and it was, yeah.
Even sometimes just the pause, just the not speaking,
Right.
the moment before. And I imagine too, a lot of that is learned as I'm listening to you. As a journalist, you're on the phone with people. You're not always face to face, right? You're listening.
Right. I think you raise a good point too on the pause, because in journalism, the pause can exist, but the pause always has to be explained, right? Because it has to have, okay, you're telling me this true story. We can't have the reader guessing. The reader's got to know, boom, boom. In fiction, it's the unspoken that often allows the reader to bring their imagination to the story and fill in exactly what you want without your saying it. And therefore, the reader becomes invested in your story, because now they feel kind of part of it. Where in journalism, because things are dealing with the truth in everyday real life that are consequences, you can't hope that the reader will get your pregnant pause,
right?
And what that means.
Any gray area could be irresponsible in an article.
Exactly.
What was your process like every day? Did you have any sort of writing ritual that you would do?
Well,
because you're still working full time at that point.
At that point, I was, I would get up when I was writing the Carver books. I was living in L.A., obviously, but I would write in the morning. I think with Goodnight Forever, the last one, I was getting up around 5:30 and then writing till about 7:30 and then going to work. I could, like some book writers, I could not write in the day after doing journalism all day. I had to do it fresh. I needed to focus it fresh. So I would write fiction in the morning until about 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then do my day job. And I found that to be a good, it complemented one another. I like that. I tried it doing in the evening, and I just was too burned out by the day.
Kind of out of gas.
But if I started with fiction and it got me into that, it kind of woke me up, and then I could transition over to doing journalism.
And how did you know that you were done with that novel? Because I think of the quote, art is never finished, it's just abandoned. So for a story like that, how did you know you were done?
When I start writing, the beginning chapter, I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know how it's going to end until I get to the middle. And then once I'm at the middle, maybe a little bit beyond the midway point, I know exactly how it's going to end, and it's kind of a race to the end. But when I'm working through it, I don't really know, because I still think I'm still seeing all the possibilities that could happen. And some people prevent that by writing an outline or things. But to me, what if something really happens? I don't want to stick with my outline. And so I see the plus and minuses of both sides, but for me, I feel like a free fall in, start writing, see what happens, and then a little past midway. So I knew what was going to happen in My Detective then, but I didn't know. I was writing My Detective as a one-off,
right?
Where I was just going to go back and fix this book I had started that made me write My Detective in the first place. And so I sent it to my agent, and then a few weeks later, she called back and said, "Hey, they want to publish your book, but they want you to do a sequel, a two-parter." And I goes, because if you, well, not to give anything away, but if you read My Detective, it doesn't end like your normal whodunit.
Right. There's a clear potential for a continuation with the two leads.
Or not. I mean, I just left it because I didn't expect it to be that way. And then I said, I don't know. I mean, I like these characters a lot. And then, so I said, all right, let's do it. And so I did it. And then midway through, almost at the end of My Detective, my agent called back again and said, will you do a third? And I said, okay, but somebody's going to die at the end of 3.
Yeah, right. You come back the next day. How about a 4th?
Because I loved writing about Sam Carver. I loved Dylan Cross. I mean, but I felt that that the lives of them singularly and together was 3 books, and I wanted to bookend it because I didn't think their relationship. I thought it was so potent and so volatile that it couldn't be strung out over a bunch of books. I wanted, one of them not to be around at the end, and I wanted that to mean something.
So that's pretty amazing because this book started as a detour, right?
Yeah.
From a novel that you couldn't quite figure out, and then it somehow became 3 books.
Yeah, and it became a lot of fun, and it taught me a lot about writing and what you can always do better. I mean, you always want to improve as a writer, and this put me in a different genre than I was used to, so the uncomfortability factor. But it taught me a lot about plot, foreshadowing, moving things, getting to the heart of things, and I really appreciated that learning experience.
And when My Detective came out, what was that reception like for you?
That was really, I mean, that was in LA, and I was still at the Times, and it was really interesting because I heard a lot of people told me about LA. They really loved, they thought LA was its own character in the book.
Absolutely.
And so most of the feedback I got was about people telling me about their versions of Los Angeles, which is great, right? Because that's what you wanted to. I'm glad they thought that Los Angeles was a character.
You had said you didn't want to go back and do stories that were already done about Los Angeles. And so it seemed like setting it in modern day helped differentiate that and make it unique to you.
I think that's true. I made it contemporary because if you don't want to go back to the 1940s, that's already been done. And you wanted to also put the now world consequences of what's happening in LA, inject that into there's a couple of scenes in all the books, but in Good Night Forever, the last one, there's a scene where Sam Carver goes and one of the guys he thinks is a right-wing funder backer is surfing. And you don't think a right-wing guy might be surfing right in that thing. And it just has him, it's just a very LA moment of an early morning guy, an old guy out on a surfboard by himself as he's riding a wave in. And there's moments like that I wanted to stop and pause and not to disrupt the action or the momentum, but to say, yeah, you wouldn't see this any other place. Just like if you were writing about something in New York or Seattle, you could do something indigenous to that it wouldn't be. And that's what I wanted to do with Los Angeles.
After writing what became 3 books, do you look at Los Angeles differently now?
I look at it as home now, right? Because I was an East Coast person by mentality. Still, New York is my favorite city. But Los Angeles, through our time here, and then especially through the books, really grew on me because I understand exactly the cliches and the stereotypes. And then we each carry our own rich moments and memories of LA that you can't put into words. I can't. The other day, or not long ago, I was just driving out, and I think I mentioned this earlier, the scene, but when you're driving down Sunset or out west toward the ocean at dusk at a certain time of day, and the palms are kind of going in the wind, and the sun is there, and that is stereotypically LA, but it evokes so much inside of me, I'm sure of everybody here. That's why we're all here. That's why we can't, That's why traffic sucks, right? Because everybody wants that. It's it's like when I lived in Rome, Italy and Los Angeles are so similar in a lot of ways, and a lot of it has to do with the light. Just the way the light moves during the day and the way it hits. You can have, I did a story on a location manager once who took me around to all the places, and he said, you can make LA anything you want, right? Because I can hit this alley, Chicago. This alley, we did a New York scene out of it. He said, you can make LA anything you want. It's like this great imaginary landscape. But write that large onto your imagination or your person and your psychology. That's why it works for so many people, and that's why it's also such a great disappointment to so many people.
Yeah, because they don't know where to go or what to make of it. There's no center per se.
Right. Oh, and also everyone who's come here, as we were talking earlier about the homeless and the broken. I mean, sort of the quote unquote misfits that you might have been described in a 40s genre novel here, but you have that one. I forgot what novelist called it, that sort of last gasp at the end of the continent. Right. That's sort of what it is, and where there's nowhere to go. Here, if LA chases all your dreams and you chase all your dreams and you're at the edge of the Pacific and they haven't come true, where do you go? Do you turn around and go back where you came from? What are you at that point? I mean, geography shapes it so much.
There's a documentary, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called Los Angeles Plays Itself. It's by Tom Anderson, who taught at Cal Arts for a while. I think it came out in the early 2000s.
Oh, I have to pick that up. That sounds great title.
It's so good, and it's basically examines how Los Angeles has been depicted on film, and which is it can be anything you want it to be.
Right.
And it speaks to what that location manager was saying. And this is a documentary kind of chronicling film history.
I should check that out.
It's such a great watch, but that's exactly on par with that. On the subject of architecture, because that's what the book is about, is there a piece of architecture that you think is underappreciated around downtown Los Angeles?
I think if you go, and I did this for the book, if you walk down Broadway and you look up, down in the heart of downtown, and you look up at beyond all the graffiti and all the awnings and stuff, at the real architecture of some of these old movie houses, it takes your breath away. I mean, and all that money, all that imagination to build these things in this, Gothic or neo whatever style of the times, and it's just gorgeous, and it's lost in a lot of ways. It's just lost amid, not the squalor, I don't want to say, although a lot of it is in the homeless area where people are really struggling, and you have that humanity feeling of desperation juxtaposed against some of the most beautiful architecture. And again, it's like that is also symbolic of wealth and poverty and what's going on. I think downtown LA is still this great social experiment of what's going to happen.
I think you bring up a good point of why I'm personally drawn to it so much, is because it's that architecture, that kind of Gothic architecture that you're talking about, that it just you don't find it anywhere else here.
Right.
And so when you're there, it's like you're discovering some whole new, you're like, oh, this is a city. LA is a city.
Right.
You have the tall buildings, the skyline, you can walk around, but the irony is, well, walking around has its own.
Yeah. But then you have these movie houses where Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford were, and you go, this is what Hollywood was in its early days.
It's like the Ace Theater, the Ace Hotel, like right there.
Yeah.
It's like Charlie Chaplin had a premiere 100 years ago there.
Right, and there's a little sign for it. Sometimes there's signs along. And I think downtown, if it really wants to come back, should celebrate that. I know there were plans to put a trolley on Broadway to sort of make it pedestrian and do things. I think that's been discussed over the years. But to celebrate the richness of downtown and merge it with the movie industry, it would be. But again, it changes, and that's why the Carver books deal with the change of you can't do that. Hollywood's in different places now, or maybe you can. I don't know.
This is something I ask every guest. It's called The Rule I Break. Every industry has rules. Some are there for a reason, and some are just begging to be broken. So what's a rule in your field that you don't follow or believe in?
I think it goes to the conformity question, right? I think I always tried to, in journalism, I think it's always just when everyone, I think Gene Roberts, editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, said, or somebody else said, when everyone zigs, you zag. You don't. I think anybody who, especially in the field of being a journalist or a writer, if you conform to anything, you're killing the self-creative process. So I think I think in my writing career, both in journalism and and in books I push back more because I want to be challenged. If I'm not doing it right or this doesn't sound right, I need you to really convince me because I just can't take your word for it. And that I don't mean that to sound egotistical because a lot of people have convinced me that this is a better way to do it. But
you mean push back on notes and feedback?
On just like, why do you think, in other words, why do you think this is better? Convince me. I want to be convinced. But if you don't have a strong argument coming at me, then you can't expect me to, after putting months and months into something, to buy your argument. Like, if you're going to give me a pushback argument, it's got to be more than one sentence. And I think sometimes that challenges people because they, luckily at the LA Times, I was really blessed because I worked with some phenomenal editors who were really into storytelling and going out there and trying to do something where you'd fall and wouldn't succeed, but the next story we would try something better to push it. And I think the Los Angeles Times, despite all the configurations and iterations it's going through today, which not always for the better, always was a storyteller's newspaper, and I hope it doesn't lose that. But that was one of the reasons I came to the LA Times, because it was a place that was, I think the New York Times for years was editor driven, but the LA Times was writer driven, and there's a difference in manifestations of what journalism looks like on both those sides. But because we used to have a joke at the Philadelphia Inquirer was that way too, as a writer's paper. Like, somebody would say, hey, you just give me 800 words on this. And somebody would say, well, I'm just clearing my throat at 800 words. And that's a certain conceit that needs to be extinguished too. I get that, but
sure.
Yeah.
Looking back, how do you define success now versus how did you define it when you were starting out?
That's a good question. I think I defined success as I was starting out as checking the boxes in some ways. I want to be a journalist. I want to be a foreign correspondent. I want to be a novelist. Okay, on paper, on note cards, that's okay, I did it. But I think that's success in one realm, but the other part of success is I did this, and this, but there were failures along the way. There was learning along the way. There were wonderfully sublime, gorgeous moments along the way. There were ugly truths along the way. And so success for me now is how I've taken those and made them enriching to my life and given that meaning to me and maybe meaning I can give to other people. So I guess it's experiences ground into or distilled into meaning that is beyond just checking the boxes of doing something. So it's education, I would say. I learned things in checking the boxes and doing what I wanted to do. I learned things that were so enriching along the way that was a success, because I walked away not walked away, I'm still doing it, but when you sit back, it's not, nobody in the end cares that how many books you wrote while you were living, or this and this. And the only thing you're taking away at that final breath, at that gasp, is, was it all worth it? Did I get what I wanted out of it? And did I transmute that to others and made their lives a little bit richer? That sounds awfully over the top and arch, and I don't mean it to sound that way at all. But it's just like, I think you realize success is really the things, the smaller things that when they're done, with excellence or to the best of your ability, can be writ so large that they become meaningful to people beyond yourself. If that sounds...
It's beautiful.
I don't know,
yeah.
But it can also sound a little bit like, but I don't mean it to sound that way. It's
no, it doesn't, and that was pretty powerful. That was pretty powerful. Yeah. Wow. What's next for you? What are you working on? What's interesting to you now?
I finishing that novel that I put in the drawer is some semblance of that is coming back, because
3 books later, right?
Yeah, 3 books later, a piece of that is in the novel I'm just finishing up now.
Did you think that you've identified what was lacking in that particular?
No, I just took part of it. I'm scavenging it.
Okay. You're picking
I
at
don't
it.
think that thing is ever coming out of the drawer, but
some
bits
parts
and
of it
pieces
are-
of it will. And
Okay.
yeah, so
Okay,
that's,
and that might be the next novel.
that's I mean, I'm just finishing up that novel now, and so yeah.
Oh, great.
And it's not Sam Carver. It's
It's
completely a standalone. Yeah.
Before we go, I like to do a rapid fire round. 5 questions. You could say as much or as little as you want. What was the last book you read?
The last book I read, well, I'm reading 2 of them. One is called by a French journalist called Lives Other Than My Own, I believe it is. It's a memoir about a guy a couple who went to Sri Lanka before when the tsunami hit, and they were going to break up, and then it hits, and what happens to them. It's a story about death, and then what death does to relationships. But it's not just that. That I'll leave it at that. That's sort of it's really quite something. And I'm reading now. Well, I'm reading that simultaneously with A Gentleman in Moscow.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. I've seen I see the cover in my head.
It's so richly drawn. I mean, it's about a count who lives in a hotel in Moscow after the Bolsheviks take over, and he's of the old aristocracy, so they put him under house arrest in a hotel in Moscow. And it's all the beautiful, wonderful, strange people he makes and friends he makes with the hotel staff and the frequenters of the hotel. And it's told in such a glorious, romantic style that it's really something. It's quite a novel.
What's a movie you love rewatching?
Casablanca, I watch that a lot, and I know that sounds kind of stereotypical of what I do, but that does. I like to watch movies to see if they hold up. I did watch Chinatown 3 months ago and hadn't seen it in years. That still holds up.
It does, right?
And I'm a sucker for the movie The Way We Were.
Oh, The Way We Were
with Barbara Streisand.
Oh yeah, sure.
For me, that's my favorite romantic movie, and I for some reason that movie holds up for me. But I mean, I think that, and I do go back every now and then because I just don't know how he did it. The 2 Godfather movies, the first 1 and 2, just for a lesson in storytelling, in texture, in character, and everything. That movie, those 2 films, just are amazing. Yeah.
If it wasn't this, what's another career field you could see yourself in?
CIA agent. I think it would be fun. Yeah. I think I would have liked to have been a spook.
Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
You don't have to write today. Because you have to write every day, right?
And you still do?
Yeah. I guess that's not the worst piece of advice because I didn't take it, but I knew that was a piece of advice you weren't going to take. Yeah.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
When people zig, you zag. I just think it's always trying to go your own way, knowing that there's going to be, you're not always going to be right, and you're going to have to learn that you're not always going to be right, but you have to accept failure and people telling you that that there was a better way to do it, and sometimes there was, and sometimes there wasn't, but to always pursue your own avenue, I think. And a lot of people have told me that. I think in journalism, you kind of do that because so many people want to throw you off the trail, especially if you're investigating. So many people don't want you to go there. And the best piece of advice is to go there, I think. And then decide what happens when you're there. But it's the journey there. And if you don't take it, if you don't ask the stupid question, or you don't go where they don't want you to go, then what good are you, I think, in our profession.
Where can people find you or find your work?
Amazon. I don't have I'm not a Luddite, but I'm not of this world either. I don't have a Medium page or a I might do that, but my all my books are on Amazon, and all my stuff is archived. Yeah, and all my stuff is archived on the LA Times.
This was just a real honor and a privilege to talk to you, Jeffrey.
Oh, it's great. I was great being here. Thanks so much. It was like a great. I love being interviewed by another interviewer, but you were great because you didn't come with a script and you picked up. We had a conversation, and that's what it's all about.
That's high praise from you, and I just want to reiterate how much I enjoyed the Sam Carver series, starting with My Detective, which came out, what was it, 2020?
2019.
2019. Yeah. And that's how I came to know you, as I said. And then I followed you randomly on Twitter at the time. You followed me back. I was like, hey, this is pretty cool.
Well, you wrote me a note.
And then years later, a couple of years later, I wrote you a note and said, hey, you don't know me. How about coming to Santa Clarita?
Yeah.
And so this was a big deal. And thank you once
again.
No,
it's been an honor, a pleasure, a lot of fun. Thanks very much.